All right, there you go.
Okay, let me get my screen share started up here. So first of all, thank you all for, I actually have to click the share button. Thank you all for coming out today to see me. I appreciate the opportunity to speak here today. Uh, as Dan said, I get that started there. Dan said, my name is Andy Levy. I am the database administrator for a benefits administration company called BRI here in Rochester, New York. Warm, sunny. No, it's not snowing at all, Rochester. And today we're going to be talking about backup basics with DBA tools and PowerShell. And I apologize in advance if some of you folks already heard this. If I get a little distracted in about 20 minutes when the Mars Perseverance lander touches down here, but we'll make that short. So a little bit about me. I am, as I said, database administrator. I'm a contributor to the DBA tools project. I am one of the leaders of the Rochester, New York SQL Server user group. And in the past, I have been our local SQL Saturday organizer. And that's going to come back at some point. We're still trying to figure that out. Contact information is right there. Don't worry about getting it right now. I'll have a slide at the end as well. So I like backups. I'm a little fanatical about backups. My personal photo library, I have at least 5, maybe 6 copies of it scattered between my house and online backup solutions and iCloud and a number of other places. But not just my data gets backed up. I like having backup hardware too. Last summer, I was presenting for SQL Saturday Albany virtual, and I was moderating a session first thing in the morning, and my computer crashed right in the middle of it. Now, fortunately, I had my work PC booted up and ready to go. I was able to jump over. Nobody noticed anything, but it kind of scared me. So over the lunch break, I set up a third computer. So I had my primary computer, I had a backup, and then I had a backup for my backup. And about 5 minutes into my presentation, my primary computer crashed. My backup was there, it was hot, ready to go. And within about 60 seconds, I was back online and continued my presentation. So I really, really like my backups. Why do we want to script our backups? We're talking about PowerShell here in DBA tools. That implies some scripting. Clicks don't scale. Yes, you can back up your databases, you can manage your backups through Management Studio, but clicking through a GUI, you can't do that on 100 instances. You can't even do that on 10 instances effectively. They aren't reproducible. You can misclick something, especially if you're on kind of janky connection. Your mouse twitches, your whatever, you might end up clicking the wrong button. It's not readily reproducible. Where did the, okay, I lost one of my slides here. I apologize for that. So anyway, another benefit of scripting is you're writing code. Your code can be checked into source control, and now you have another copy of it, you have a backup copy of it, and you can share it with other people. Your backup scripts, your code becomes your documentation. You can communicate to other people. This is how we do these processes. And very often we'll be asked, how do you perform your backups? How do you check your backups are working properly? Well, I'm not going to tell you how I do it. I'm going to show you the script that does it. And for some reason, I don't know why that's not working today. So why do we use PowerShell? PowerShell is integrated throughout Windows, throughout SQL Server. We've got the server management objects library. We've got things interacting with Windows. We can manage clusters with it. We can manage availability groups. PowerShell is really becoming the lingua franca of Windows administration and Microsoft platform administration, even out to Azure. And I'm a bit of a PowerShell fan. I look at problems and I say, oh, we're going to use PowerShell for this because that's my That's my primary tool. Sometimes it gets me in trouble because it's the first thing I go for, and it's not always the right thing, but it's usually where I start. So why the DBA tools module? DBA tools is a module for PowerShell. It's community driven. It's a community project that's open source. If people in the community decide, oh, we need this functionality, they write up an issue, they write up the code change, and they file a pull request. There isn't anything done in DBA tools that people in the community have not identified a need for. There's broad compatibility with DBA tools. Now, DBA tools does not go out of its way to support older versions of SQL Server, but in cases where DBA tools is writing T-SQL to do some of its activities or using SMO, it's as compatible as those SMO libraries can be. So there's a lot of features of DBA tools that are still functional with SQL Server 2000. If you have to do a migration from 2000 to newer versions, first of all, please hurry up and get that done. But second of all, DBA tools can help you with that because for the most part, it'll work with older versions. There are some things that won't, and they'll just throw an error or warning. You'll have to work around that. It's very well tested. There are thousands of DBA tools users all over the world. The Git repository has thousands of tests that get executed every time a commit is pushed up to Git. And your pull requests are not going to get merged unless your tests pass. And any new features, any new functionality that you create and you submit to DBA tools, you are expected to have pester unit tests come along with those. So it's not enough to just write the code, you also have to produce working tests for it. And DBA tools is really well documented. There's comment-based help on every one of the functions. There's blog posts from dozens and dozens of people who are using DBA tools. And it's open source. You can go through the code and see for yourself how it's doing various things. If I'm working just in PowerShell generically, writing my own functions, my own modules, I open up the DBA tools source if I'm trying to remember how does this work in PowerShell, because DBA tools is written the way PowerShell modules are meant to be written. I just checked this morning. There are 594 functions in DBA tools. I'm not going to go over all of them because we don't have an entire month to go through it all. But if you're trying to do something with SQL Server, you want to do it through PowerShell, DBA tools probably has something that'll take care of it for you. And I'll tell a brief embarrassing story for myself. It was just last week. I needed to go through an entire database and figure out how many of our tables were getting close to the limit of the identity field, the limit of an integer on an identity field. Wrote a whole T-SQL query for it, ran it, everything looks good. And I said, wait a minute, there's one function in DBA tools that I should have run here. And that did the whole thing for me. Now, the good news is I ran that function and it produced the same results my query did. So at least I got it right. But I know now for next time, just go get the function out of DBA tools. So it's time for demos. This is a very demo heavy presentation. So we're just going to pop over to Azure Data Studio. I'm using Azure Data Studio because, one second, I just want to minimize there we go. I'm using Azure Data Studio because I'm using the notebooks feature. And if you haven't used this yet, it's really, really great. What Azure Data Studio notebooks let you do is mix code and documentation. And your documentation is in the form of Markdown. So you can create troubleshooting guides, you can create run books, you can share data with other people very readily. So this is a PowerShell notebook, but I've also used SQL notebooks at work. And I was actually jumping up and down here in my little home office when this happened the first time. I had a developer say, hey, Andy, I need to check some configuration settings off this table in the production environment. I said, okay, send me the query. He sends me over a notebook. The notebook just has the SQL queries in it. When you execute a SQL query through a notebook, it embeds the results right in the notebook. So I opened up the notebook, connected my instance, ran the queries, saved that file, and sent the whole thing back to him. And so that's how we communicated. I didn't have to run 4 different queries, save them out to Excel files, make sure they're named properly so he knows which one goes with which query, and then send it all back. We could communicate all through that one file. Really, really cool stuff. Today I'm using a PowerShell notebook to do something very similar. So I've got a walkthrough here of everything that we're going to do, explain what we're doing, and then we can run the code and see the results. Now I say that in the first 2 things I'm not actually going to execute. So to install a PowerShell, the dbatools module, it's just like any other PowerShell module from the gallery. If you don't want to get prompted to trust the repository every time, just run set ps repository, give it the name, and just tell it you're trusting this repository for installing things from. I'm going to skip over that. I've already done that on my desktop. dbatools is the name of the module. So this code here is checking to see, do I have dbatools installed? If I do, I'm just going to update it. If I don't have it installed, I'm going to install the module. And I'm specifying scope current user. If you are using PowerShell 6 or 7, which is the new .NET Core based I don't say open source, well, it is open source, cross-platform version of PowerShell, your default scope will be current user. It'll install it to the module to your profile. Older versions default to a global scope for the installation, which is fine if you want to make it available to everybody using the computer. But I tend to install to the current user scope because that way I don't have to elevate my permissions. And I'm going to skip running that. I did update this morning. I'm going to skip over that because it takes a couple minutes just because of the size of the module. A couple of conventions that I'm going to use throughout this that dbatools uses. If you need to get help, I don't know why I'm still holding that. If you need help with a function, you can just use get help, and that's just like any other PowerShell function. Those help files are also published on docs.dbatools.io. What's really cool is every time a build to publish the module, an official release of the module happens, that documentation website is automatically updated. So it's always in sync with the current released version of dbatools. We have a function called find DBA command, which does exactly what it says. You give it a search term and it's going to search through the help. It's going to search through some metadata and it will find functions related to what you're looking for. Naming conventions. dbatools follows the standard PowerShell naming conventions, verb-noun, and we precede every function with DBA, the noun with DBA. So verb-DBA noun is how you'll find all of the dbatools functions. Most gets have a corresponding get function. Most gets have a corresponding set function. So if you want to get information about a database and then set information about a database, it's probably going to be the same noun. Gets are totally harmless. You don't have to worry about hurting anything. They're not going to change the state of your environment at all. The last thing I'm just going to mention real quick is throughout these demos, I'm using a technique called variable splatting. And what that lets you do is define a dictionary object, a hash of name-value pairs for a parameter name and its value. And that makes the code a lot easier to read. You don't end up getting really wide command lines. And you can also modify your parameters programmatically. And so you can dynamically change your parameter list, which comes in really, really handy if you don't want to have to say, backup DBA database, and then this set of parameters, or backup DBA database with this other set of parameters. You can just set the parameters and then call the function one time. And there's some help in PowerShell, get help about splatting, give you more in-depth information about that. All right, so let's run some code. First, we're going to find out how many functions do we have in dbatools that deal with backups. So I'm going to use find dba command backup. So it's going to find any command having something to do with backups. And I'll go ahead and run that. And oh, that's some extra. That's from when I previously ran. Oh, I don't know why it does this. I really need to sort that out. Let's try this again. There we go. There's 69 public functions that reference backups in dbatools. I'm not going to go over all of them today because, again, we don't have all day. And now I'm going to get command just from the dbatools module, everything that has backup in the noun itself. And here are all the functions that have something to do with backup just in their name. Again, I'm not going to get through all these today. I'm just going to be touching on the basics here. So lots and lots of stuff in dbatools to deal with backups because backups are really important to us as DBAs, right? One other quick note, I actually am not using this. I had to change it. But with PowerShell notebooks in Azure Data Studio, you can create global variables. Any variable that you create and reference, that you set in a code block is accessible to any future code block that you execute. So in this case, I have SQL 17 and SQL 19 that I'm setting to the names of my local instances. I can now reference those variables anywhere in my future code blocks. That's a big difference, though, from the SQL notebooks. If you do the same thing, you cannot do that because each code block is treated as a separate batch in SQL notebooks. You do temp tables that way, but not variables. So backups and restores. And what are they doing? Hey, they're doing good on Mars. Cool. If there are any questions, please feel free to jump in here. So when I first set up an instance of SQL Server, in my environment, we use TDE on all of our instances. I've been asked to do so by our security department, and I like to keep my security folks happy. So I set up a brand new instance. The very first thing I'm going to do is back up my service master key, my database master key, and my TDE certificates. Because if I don't have those backed up somewhere and we have a catastrophic failure, I can't restore my databases. And if I can't restore my databases, I better be able to restore my resume. So I'm going to back up my service master key. I'm just going to set a really bad password here. Please don't keep your passwords in your scripts. I'm doing this for demo purposes, but that's not a good practice. And that has to be a secure string. I'm going to set my variable splat here, key backup parameters, just name value parameters, my instance name, the path I'm going to back up to, and the password for the backup. I'm going to call backup DBA service master key with that set of parameters. I run that, it says it ran, success. And we can see over here in the file viewer, file explorer in ADS, I now have my service master key backup. And you notice it created a unique name. It's got a timestamp in it. So I've got the instance name. I've got an indicator that it's service master key, SMK, and then the timestamp that we created this backup. So it's really easy to keep track of where this came from and when we did it. So now I'm going to back up my master database master key. And here's an example of programmatically modifying that variable splat right here. I'm just going to add one more parameter to it. Everything else I'm going to keep the same password. I shouldn't do that for real in my real environment. So I'm just going to add the master database. I'll run this to that parameter set. I'll run it again. It was successful. And now we've got my master database backup key. Or my master database key backup, I should say. And now my certificate. Now I'm going to create a new variable set of parameters here. Instance path, encryption and decryption password for my certificate, the database where that certificate lives, and the name of the certificate. I run backup DBA DB certificate. And that's going to create both the certificate backup and the private key file. And everybody's cheering, so I'm assuming that they successfully landed.
Touchdown confirmed. We are on Mars.
Outstanding. All right. All right, that's good. Thank you for indulging me. I'm a bit of a space geek. So we got those objects now backed up. I should know what my passwords are. And I'm going to take those files and their corresponding passwords. I'm going to move those over into my enterprise password vault for safekeeping. All right, now we can actually back up the databases. So I'm going to start out with a really simple backup. And I've got a database here on my SQL 17 instance called satellites. I'm going to back up to C SQL backup. I'm backing up from SQL 17 to that path. Database is satellites, and create folder is true. And what this is going to do for me is, if there isn't already a folder called satellites, in the backup directory, it's going to create it for me and then put those files in there. I'm going to run the backup DBA database, and save that result to a variable. Then I'm also going to take the backup path that was written to and save that off to another variable, because I'm going to use that later on. So go ahead and run that. And if I switch back over to my files, it is finished running. So now I have backups. SQL backup, there's my satellites folder, and there's the file that I created. And just like those keys, database name _ timestamp.back. There's my backup. And what information did we get about that backup when we created it? Quite a bit. dbatools is going to produce the whole thing. So I can just barely fit it on one screen. This is the object that comes back, that's created, with all the information about my backup. Was it complete? Yes, that's good. The file name, the folder, the path, the database name, the SQL script that it executed to create the backup. Whether we did a verification on it, where we did the backup, start and end time, so we can see it took only a second. And then here's our duration right there. It's calculated as well. I'd like to thank the person I bought this computer from for putting a really nice fast SSD into it. Where we backed up to, the full path, the size, compressed backup size, the same. No compression ratio is 1. We didn't compress our backup. That's interesting. We're going to come back to that. The files that we actually backed up, so the MDF file and the LDF file, LSNs. So is it a copy only backup? Tons and tons of information about the backup here. Now, if I want, I could take that and save it off elsewhere to a log file, to a log table, something like that, if I want to keep that preserved somewhere. And I can also check some of those properties of that object. If I'm running this as part of a larger script, I can interrogate the object and make sure that things did run properly, and then I can retry if I have to, things of that nature. Oh, and there's a picture from Mars. Sweet. I'm just going to turn that off because I'm distracting myself. So if we want to do a little bit more advanced backups, we want to do a copy-only backup. We want to span it across multiple files for a little better throughput. We want to compress our backup because remember, it wasn't compressed previously. Do a checksum and verification. Do a custom timestamp format for the file name. Adjust our max transfer size and buffer counts. We can do all of this through the parameters on backup DBA database. And this is just kind of touching the iceberg, touching the tip of the iceberg here. There's so many options for these functions. I can't get into all of them today. And why would we want to adjust max transfer size and buffer count? We may want to, after we do some testing in our environment, we may decide, oh, the defaults don't really work as well as some non-default values for throughput. So we're going to set those values. Also, if you are using TDE on SQL Server 2019 before CU5, if you set your max transfer size higher than 64K, that will let you do compression. I learned that a few weeks ago. You have to explicitly set it though. In 2019 CU5 and newer, you don't have to explicitly set it, which is nice. So same parameters here to start with. We're going to make it a copy only backup. We're going to just explicitly state that we want a full backup. We can also do differentials and logs, span across 4 files, compress it, do checksum verification, set my max transfer size to 2 megs. PowerShell has really neat shorthands for this. If you want 1 megabyte, just 1 MB, and then you multiply your values, it will actually come up with the correct value instead of being just 1 and 6 zeros. Then my timestamp format is any timestamp format that you can use in .NET, because PowerShell is just .NET, right, underneath. So in this case, we're going to be year, the short name of the month, day, and then 24-hour time, hour, minute, second. So I'll go ahead and run that. And it's still running. But you can see here are the 4 files that we created. And it numbers them sequentially, 1, 2, 3, 4. Automatically names it for me and everything. And I've got my, there's my file names right there. So if we take a look at the object that was returned, see it's very, very similar to what we had previously. I apologize for the line wrapping. But we've got now 4 files that were created. Here's our backup database command with the 4 files specified. Everything else is there as well. This time our total size was 8 megs, not 6 megs. But we got really good compression. We got 8.65 to 1 compression on this backup. Now, if we're curious, what is dbatools running behind the scenes? And we just want to learn what the different options turn into with the backup database command. We can add this one extra parameter, output script only. We set that to true, and that's going to go through all the machinations of backup DBA database, except it's not actually going to execute it. It's just going to output. This is the T-SQL that you need to create the backup that you just specified. So if you're just getting familiar with backing up databases, trying to get comfortable with it, understanding what the options look like, you can set those through dbatools and then run it with output script only and see what that turns into with in T-SQL. So there's our copy only right there. We've got our checksum right there, max transfer size, the whole deal. So we've done a simple backup, we've done an ad hoc backup. What about restores? Because we want to be able to restore our backups if we're taking them. We have backup DBA database. We also have restore DBA database. It does exactly what it sounds like. So I'm going to set my parameters here. I'm going to point it at the satellites directory that we created right over here. I'm going to restore the database that it finds there, the backup files. And I'm going to restore into my SQL Server 2019 instance, and I'm going to give it a different name on SQL Server 2019. It's going to be called Satellites 19. So I'll go ahead and run that. And if I switch over here while it's running, there we go. My database just got restored into my SQL 2019 instance. And if I was on a network, I could, if I wanted to, as long as both SQL Server instances have the appropriate permissions on a common network share, I can use this to back up a database on one instance and restore it onto another one. In fact, copy DBA database from dbatools is pretty much a wrapper with some other things in it, but it's pretty much a wrapper around backup and restore, because that's one of the easier ways to do a database copy. So I ran the restore, and I'll go ahead and look at the object that it returned. So computer instance, SQL instance, database name. It set me as the owner because by default, when I do a restore of a database, I am the owner of it. Backup files count 4. So it restored from 4 files, and it restored a total of 2 files, and it was compressed what it restored from. So knowing that we backed up the database twice, once as a single file and once as it was spanned across 4 files, we know that it restored, and we can look a little closer here, it restored the most recent backup. If I have multiple backups of one database in a folder, it's going to pick by default the most recent one. And
Andy, can I ask on that?
Sure.
Does it know that it's the most recent one based on the header file? Is that how it does it? It checks the header and pulls it that way, or does it base it off of the naming convention or when it was, put in that folder?
That's a really good question. I have not checked into that. I'm going to make a note of that.
Because my thought is, if you're copying files over to a folder, how would it know if it's the most recent? And I think I've seen different instances where it checks the file headers. I'm not sure though.
I have made a note of that, and I will check that out, and I will put it up on my blog.
Okay, just also, yeah, ping me back when you get that, and I'll post that in on this for the meetup on the discussions for this one.
Yes, definitely. It's an excellent question. Thank you, Dan. Yeah, it's either by the file timestamp or by looking at the headers. And if I had to guess, I would say it's probably based on the headers, because timestamps are not totally reliable. So I think it's probably the headers. I will check that, and I will post that up on my blog. So yeah, we're going through. We've got here the files that we restored from. Here's the restore script. We also have backup start and end times. When was that backup started and completed that we had restored? So we took that backup at 2.5 minutes past the hour. Restore target time, we just said latest. Show me, give me the most recent, give me the absolute most up-to-date data in that backup to be restored. Sometimes we'll have backup a directory full of backups. We don't want to restore the latest. We want to restore a very specific one. So I'm going to grab that single backup file that I had saved off earlier, the satellites 2021 02 18 1557 backup, and I'm going to restore that one instead. And I'm going to do it with replace because the database now exists. I need to explicitly overwrite it. dbatools is not going to replace your database unless you tell it to replace the database. We want to be safe about this. So I'll go ahead and do that restore. And there we go, it's finished. And if we take a look, we've got, so we restored from 1 file, and that was not compressed. So now we know for sure that it definitely restored that single file, not the most recent one. But remember, I said earlier, and we see it again here, database owner is me because I restored the database. I don't usually want that. Usually I want SA to be the owner. So I can use set DBA DB owner. So this is going to operate on a single database, DB. Sometimes it feels a little redundant, DBA DB. I've just pointed at the instance and the database and tell it I want SA to be the owner of this database. I run it, boom. Now my SA account is the owner of that database. And you can also, and I've done this a few times, there's a I think it's test DBA DB owner. You can write a one-liner with a pipeline to find out which databases are not owned by your target login, and then pipe that into set DBA DB owner. So you can just go ahead and set across your whole instance, if you so desire, all the non-SA owned databases to be owned by SA. Now, just like with backup DBA database, restore DBA database also has the output script only parameter. And it does the exact same thing. It goes through all the work to figure out how to do the restore, but it doesn't actually execute it. It just shows you the script, the T-SQL that's going to be executed if you want to do it. I'm also going to, and this time around, I'm going to replace the database name in the file. So when I did my previous restore from SQL 2017 to 2019, my MDF files, I'll come back up here, my log and my MDF file, the names just are just satellites.mdf, satellites.log.ldf, because that's what the names were on the source instance. I usually like to have my file names match as close as possible the name of the database. And when I restored to SQL 19, I renamed the database to satellites 19. They don't match anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and run this just as a script only. This is going to show me that, all right, we're going to restore database satellites 19. And I'm going to move the logically named satellites file to satellites19.mdf, and similar for the log file. And just like with backup DBA database, this is really handy if you just want to learn how the restores work, what a restore database function query looks like. I also have used it in the past just as a sanity check. I think I know what I want to get restored, but I want, rather than just having dbatools run it, I want one last chance to look at it before I hit the button and say go. So I'll run this in my PowerShell window. I'll put it out, send it out to my clipboard, paste it into Management Studio or Azure Data Studio, give it one more look, and then execute the restore. In a previous position, I had over 9,000 databases on one instance, and we were doing a couple of restores a week because the odds just work out that way when you have that many databases, right? And so I did that all the time because I wanted to be absolutely sure I had the right name that I was restoring into, because I didn't want to take another database offline when I already had one offline. I'm trying to restore database A, which is offline right now. If I restore it over a database B, now I have two databases offline. That's not how I want to spend my Friday afternoons. So that was really basic, just ad hoc backup, simple restore to the latest point in time of a database. What if we have a bad update that gets run and we need to do a point in time restore? These are a little bit more involved because you have to know where you're restoring to. You have log backups you have to restore and everything. dbatools makes this pretty easy. So what I'm going to do is I have on my server, my instance here, I have the Stack Overflow database from 2010. It's about 8 gigs, so it's nice and small enough to be manageable. I'm just going to look at one user here, user 46185. And there's the information about them. I just ran invoke DBA query, which runs a query. What's really fun with this is if you've used Central Management Server, it works very similarly, where you can pass in a list of SQL Server instances and it will run that same query against all those instances and include the instance name in the results set, just like Central Management Server in SSMS does. I use that when I need to pull stuff for audits and whatnot. And again, my security folks, when I get to give them a spreadsheet and say, here you go, they love it because it takes me about 30 seconds to answer their request, and it takes them a day to go through all the data, and then they don't ask me questions for another day. So here's this user's information. Their reputation is 119. I'm feeling nice today. I'm going to bump their reputation to an even 200. So I got my update query here, and I'll go ahead and run that. And oh, wait a minute, I fat fingered their display name here. It was supposed to be 46185. I have 46185.5. So I think I just updated the wrong person. So I'm going to take a look at both users' reputation now. And yep, user 46185, they're still at 119, 46185, they're up at 200 now. So before I go any further, I need to save my, there we go. I need the point in time. So I got that. So let's restore the database. Before we go ahead and do the restore, because it, well, I may or may not have hit it. I don't remember what my intervals are. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a log backup so that I have that transaction log that I can then restore from. So I'm going to do a log backup type. I'm going to write out a path that it looks a little crazy, but what it is it's going to match the location and the naming convention that's created when I use Ola Hallengren's maintenance solution for doing all my scheduled backups. Because that's what I have installed and running already on my system for doing my scheduled backups. And build path basically just says, if this path doesn't already exist, go ahead and build the whole thing out. So I'll go ahead and run that. And now if I look at my files, there we go. So we have right here, we have a successful log backup. And if I look at my directory here, I've got, there's my file that got created. And it looks like, oh, I took, okay, so I'm not taking them every 15 minutes, I'm doing it every hour. So I definitely needed that. And we'll restore into a different database. Reason being, I want to be able to copy the data over from the restored database into the live database. So I'm going to restore. I'm just going to point it at the top level path of where my backups for this database are kept. I'm going to give it a name, Stack Overflow 2010 restored. I need to tell it the point in time that I'm going to restore to. There we go. So that was 4/14/26. That was right before I ran my ill-fated update. I'm going to replace the database name in the file names because I can't have file names with the same, multiple files with the same file name in one folder. And then this last parameter, maintenance solution backup. DBATools understands the directory structure that Ola Hallengren's maintenance solution creates. So it knows that under Stack Overflow, by specifying that one parameter, it knows that under Stack Overflow 2010, I'm going to find a directory called full, a directory called log, and maybe a directory called diff. And inside each one of those folders is going to be the files that make up those various backups for the database. So it's going to walk through the whole thing and figure out all the database backups, full backups, the log backups, the diff backups, if applicable, figure out the order that it needs to apply them all in. So I'm going to go ahead and run that restore. That's going to take more than 2 seconds and capture the results. And if I look back over here, oh, wrong database, wrong server. So we can see there's the database, it's in the restoring state, it's working, and done. So we'll look at that restore result object that came back, and it's actually a collection of objects because we performed more than one restore, right? We did our full backup that we restored first, 8.5 gigs, and that one was taken at 326.55. There's a better, there, right there. So that's when that was taken. That was when I reset my environment before we started the meeting. So it did that, it restored that one right there. No recovery was specified as true because we're going to have log backups coming after the fact. We have to restore with no recovery. So my backup start and end times, my restore target times. So we specified when we're going to restore to, and here's the script that it ran. And you can see it added in the stop at. And then here's all the files that we worked with. So that was the first restore. That was the full backup that was restored. The second backup that was restored, again, with no recovery. We had one file was back that was restored. It was only 140 megs. And here's our transaction log backup. All right, so we're going to, it restores our transaction log backup. And then the third backup that we restore, why did it do, see, that one was taken at, oh, I did it because I did a log backup immediately after 3:27 p.m. Then I did a third log restore from a backup taken at 4 p.m. right on the hour. They've all got stop ats in them. And then our last one specified no recovery false, because this is the final log backup we had to restore. And that backup was taken at 4:17. Our restore target time was 4:14. So that's the very last one. So I just had to write one restore DBA backup command, tell it this is the point in time I want to restore to, and it did everything for me. It constructed all the restore log, or constructed the restore database, the restore log, the whole deal, and applied them in the correct order. It saves me a ton of time from having to put those things together myself. So now I'll query that restored database and take a look at these users' reputations. All right, so we have user 46.185 is at 119, 46.1.855, they're back at 6 in that restored database. Now I can go ahead and, using this database and my original database, fix that data that I had corrupted and move on with my day. Once I've finished all that, I'm going to remove that restored database. I don't need to keep that around anymore. Especially in an environment where if we're constrained for space, or maybe we just have really strict data protection requirements, we want to make sure we get rid of that database as quickly as possible if we don't need it anymore. Remove DBA database drops the database. And this is a destructive action. So dbatools, unless you explicitly say, don't prompt me for confirmation, it's going to pop up and say, are you really sure you want to do this? And you have to say, yes, I do. Confirm false says, nope, don't bother confirming it. I really do want to do this. So I go ahead and run that. And now my database is gone and its status is dropped. So we did backups, we did restores, we did a point in time restore, and then we removed the database that we just that we created through that restore. Go back and check some of our basic setups though. Get DBA default path will tell me where by default SQL Server is writing not just my database backups, but my error logs, where my data lives, where my log files live by default. I keep coming back to my security folks, but I really enjoy working with them. They're really good. And they ask me good questions. We have a SIM in our environment, which I forget, SEIM, I forget what it stands for. Basically, it's monitoring log files and whatnot. And they came to me and they said, Andy, is there any way that we can track failed logins, people trying to log into our SQL Server instances? We want to know if anybody's trying to get in and failing at it. I said, yeah, we have a log file for SQL Server, but it's in a different place on every server. And they said, oh, well, we really want to put our agent out there and be monitoring all those things. So I said, okay, give me 30 seconds here. So I took get DBA default path, pointed it at every instance in my environment, and just extracted the computer name and the error log path. I dumped that out to a CSV file or an Excel file, handed it off to them and said, here you go, here's where you're going to look. And they said, okay, great. Next day they come back and they say, hey, that's pretty cool. We got all of the agents on all the servers looking at the right place now. We're watching all those error logs for failed logins, so we'll get notifications. Perfect, exactly what we want to see. So we can also see what the backup path is if we want to do an audit of that as well. And yes, these are all on C because I only have the one drive on my laptop. In a real environment, none of this stuff would be on the C drive. So we saw earlier that my backups weren't getting compressed. And we really want them to be compressed. So get DBA SP configure will get you the value of any parameter that can be set through the SP configure stored procedure. If you don't pass in a name, it will return all of them. So if I just run this for default backup compression, and when you're working with this at the command line, if you do -name space and then you start hitting tab, it will start auto completing. It'll show you all the values that you can pop in there. So here's everything we need to know about the default backup compression configuration value or configuration setting: description, display name, how it's set up. So configured value 0, default value 0. It's a 1 or 0. It's either on or off, and we're running with 0. So yeah, I haven't turned it on here. That did nothing to the state of my instance. It did not change the state of my instance. Set DBA SP configure will update it. So I can pass in the value, which is going to be just a 1. I want to turn on backup compression. Run that, boom. Now I'm compressing my backups. You can also, if you have multiple parameters with SP configured that are all binary, or they would all take the same value, usually that only happens with binaries, you can pass a collection, you can pass a list of names. And I have, as one of my setup scripts for my environment, I have a line in the PowerShell script that's set DBA SP configure -name and probably 4 or 5 settings that all take a 1 or 0 as the value. I just pass that, I run that one command, and all 4 or 5 of those get set to 1 automatically for me. I don't have to have multiple instances of that function in my script. So ad hoc backups are all well and good, but we really should be scheduling our backups, right? We want to know that they're running on time all day, every day. dbatools has a way to install, and if you're a fan of Ola Halloran's maintenance solution, we have a way to install it right off of GitHub for you. We don't have anything for other backup processes, but if you want to use Ola Halloran's, it's all built in. Install DBA maintenance solution does exactly that. What's really great is it doesn't come with the scripts packaged in dbatools itself. We'll actually go out to GitHub and fetch the latest version right from there, or you can use a locally stored copy if you want to do that. If you're installing multiple, if you're installing it on multiple servers, it'll download once and then it caches it locally, so you're not re-downloading the same thing over and over and over again, which is really nice, because sometimes, you know, if you hit the timing just right. This actually happened to me with dbatools a year or so ago. I was updating dbatools across my whole environment, and a new release was published while my script was running. So I had version 1.0.20 on half my servers and 1.0.21 on the other half of my servers. It was really confusing for a little while. Why is this function not working on these computers? I just updated everybody. That's because of that timing glitch. So my parameters for installing, I'm going to install to my SQL 2019 instance. I'm going to install the whole solution. That's index maintenance and backups and integrity checks. You can install individual ones if you want, but if you want to install the agent jobs as well, you have to specify solution all. I'm going to install the scripts into the DBA things database, not my master database. I'm going to clean up my backups after 25 minutes. I'm going to install the agent jobs. I'm going to log to the command log table, and I'm going to replace the maintenance solution if it already exists in this database. Be careful with this parameter, because it will drop the command log table. If you rely upon the command log table for any kind of reporting, auditing, compliance, anything like that, you will lose that table. if you're okay with losing it, that's fine. You can go ahead and use install DBA maintenance solution to do an upgrade if you want. But if you need to keep that, what you will have to do is download the SQL scripts yourself and execute them manually to just update the stored procedures. In this case, it's my laptop. I don't really have any of those requirements, so I'm just going to go ahead and run the whole install. And it will, there we go, it ran successfully. That ran really fast because I already had a copy locally cached. If you want to always go out to GitHub to get the latest version, specify the force parameter. So I'm just going to do it right here, force. Nope, see, this is why we don't type in demos, right?
You beat me to saying it, Andy, but you're right. This is why we don't type in demos.
So if I specify force, that will ignore my locally cached copy and it will download it direct from GitHub. So verify that it's installed. Get DBA agent job gets a listing of all the jobs, or it really gets a lot more than that, but it gets objects for all of the agent jobs on the target instance. We know that those jobs get created in the database maintenance category, so we can filter that right there. And we're just going to grab the names. So we're just checking that they got installed. The agent jobs got installed. And there we go. There's all of our maintenance solution jobs. They're installed. Great. But it's not enough to just install them. We got to schedule them, right? I'm going to specify 2 jobs that I want to check schedules for: the log backups and the full backups. I'm going to get just those jobs. I'm going to pull out a count of how many job schedules are associated with each one of those jobs. And there's none, which we expect because we just installed this, right? So we downloaded, we installed, we did not schedule anything, schedule count is 0, but the jobs are there. There's a lot of code here, and I'm just going to, and it's a lot of copy paste code. So I'm going to go ahead and create schedules for them. I'm going to create 2 schedules, one that runs on a 5-minute interval, one that runs on a 15-minute interval. If you've worked in the agent schedule setup screens in Management Studio, these names should look really familiar. So SQL instance, schedule name, we're going to run this daily, every 1 day, and within each day, we're going to run every 5 minutes. And this one, we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to run every 15 minutes. And new DBA agent schedule is going to create those schedules on the instance for us. And it's going to return an object that represents that schedule. So I have 2 that are going to get created. I created them. And now I'm going to set the schedule on those agent jobs. So log backup parameters, we got the instance name, the job name, and then the schedule we're going to pass in. Same thing for the full backups, the full backup job, and the every 15-minute schedule. We'll go ahead and run that. And so now I'm using set DBA agent job. You can use set DBA agent job to set all kinds of properties of agent jobs, not just the schedule. I just did the schedule here because that's what we're interested in. And it returns the agent jobs, an object for each one of those agent jobs. And now run status is idle because we haven't started it off. Last run date is 0 because we've never run it. But our create date is a couple minutes ago because we just ran the scripts to install it. And now if we want to kick off a full backup, start DBA agent job is going to kick off the job that we name here. And there we go. Now, just like in Management Studio, it's going to start it. We got a status of executing. It's off to the races. We're not waiting for it to finish. You can specify a wait parameter on start DBA agent job if you want to have the function not return until that job is completed. And that could come in handy if you've got a script where the first thing you need to do is back up the database, but you don't want to do anything else until that backup is complete. You'd specify start DBA agent job, the name of the backup job, and then wait. When that job finishes, then your script will proceed. So we've now got them scheduled. We want to make sure that they're actually getting backed up, make sure our databases are getting backed up. Get DBA last backup is going to go out to each database on the instance and tell me about the most recent backup for each database out there. And there's actually a lot more data that gets returned than what you see here. This is just the default output. But we've got the database name, when we last did a full backup, when we last did a transaction log backup, and if I was doing diff backups, those would show up here as well. So this you might run just to keep tabs on things. Hey, are all my backups, are all my databases getting backed up fairly recently? We want to see the full history of backups for a database. We use get DBA DB backup history. And unless you want to deal with way more output than you can, than you really want to see, I said that horribly. You're going to get a lot of output if you don't specify as just a single database. We'll put it that way. You don't have to specify a single database. You can do all the databases, but it's going to be a lot of output. So this is going to go back through the full backup history of that database and then sort by the start date. Here are all my backups. So I had a full at 3:26 p.m. Then I had log backups. I had 3 log backups since. If I'm curious about, remember I said there's going to be a lot of history if we let it go against all the databases. We just want to look at the last day. We can specify a starting point for the DBA backup, DBA DB backup history. So again, sequences will include copy only backups this time around. Why not? The start date is going to be exactly one day ago. And then even though all my backups do go to disk, I'm just going to explicitly say device type of disk. Now, by not specifying a database, I'm going to get all the databases on this instance. And I'm going to sort it by the start time. And there we go. I got to say that my backup or my scripts are running a lot faster with Zoom than they did with GoToMeeting. So here is all of my backup history sorted by backup start date and going back one day. So there we go. There's yesterday at 5:08 p.m. And that's a lot of data. That's because it's log backups of every database every hour. I can send that out to Excel though. And I'm going to use another module called Import Excel, which is also open source. It's on GitHub. It's also on the PowerShell gallery. It's by Doug Finke, F-I-N-K-E. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. I apologize, Doug.
And one thing that I'd like to add on that real quick, Andy,
Yep.
The export and import Excel
Yep.
functions do not require Office to be installed on the server in which they're running.
Yes, that's correct.
So that's a good thing to know if you do want to build Excel sheets. You can use this and you don't have to have an Office license, still can build an Excel sheet.
Yep. And yeah, and it comes in tremendously helpful. So yeah, as long as you have the PowerShell module, yes, you can create those Excel files and without Excel on the machine, and folks love Excel files, right? So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing I did before. I'm going to get my backup history the same way I did previously. I'm going to export it to Excel. So I got a path I'm going to specify. If the file already exists, I'm going to clear out the sheet, auto size the columns, freeze the top row, make the top row bold, throw a filter on those column headers, because I always do that anyway. So why not have the script do it for me? And show is really not going to be useful in the case where you're doing this on the server, but on my desktop, what show is going to do is open that spreadsheet file right up. on my screen as soon as it's been created. There's also, if you don't want to specify a path, I just found out about this last week, there's a now parameter that will create a temp file and then open it up in Excel. So you don't even have to specify a path. So I'll go ahead and run this, and it's going to take a second. There we go. Here comes Excel. And there's my file. There's my backup history in Excel. Start and end dates, who took the backup, when, the whole deal. And as you can see, there's a lot more data here than what we saw in the default output previously. And again, for compliance folks, when they say, well, can you document that you're taking backups on the interval that you say you're taking backups? Oh, sure. I run this, I send them an Excel file. They've got thousands and thousands of rows of history for them to look through now to make sure that I'm doing what I say I'm doing. Backup integrity. DBAtools doesn't just let you do backups and restores. It also lets you make sure that your backups are good. Because if you can't restore a backup, or if your database that's in that backup is corrupted, what's the point? So we have test DBA last backup. And I'm going to point it at, I have two instances here. I've got my SQL 17 instance, I got my SQL 2019 instance. I'm going to take backups from my 2017 instance and restore and run CheckDB on my SQL 2019 instance. I'm just going to do these three databases because it does take a few seconds to do each one. A couple of things to keep in mind. Number one, like I said earlier, both instances have to have the appropriate access to whatever file share, whatever path your database backups live on, and make sure that you're staying within your license compliance. And I know that Microsoft did change some things with software assurance and being able to offload CheckDBs to other instances. Just if you're doing this across two instances, just make sure you're licensed appropriately. I am not a licensing expert. Talk to your licensing experts, make sure you're in compliance. I hope that was enough of a disclaimer to cover myself. So test DBA last backup is going to take those backups from 2017, restore them in 2019, and then run dbcc checkdb against those backups, or I'm sorry, against those restored back databases. So I'll go ahead and kick that off, and I will refresh. There we go. So it's giving your restored database for test purposes a very distinctive name. You're not going to clobber database names when you do this, because you're probably not going to have a database named dbatools -test restore your regular database name. And it already finished already? Wow. Yep. And then it dropped the database that it created. We ran test DBA last backup and captured the results. Let's take a look at the results that we captured. There we go. So here's our first one, the DBA things database. We've got a size, restore results, success. DBCC results, success. How long did the restore take? How long did DBCC take? Sorry. What backups did we restore from? And what were the backup files that we restored? Same thing with my geocaches database. We actually had multiple backup files here. We restored all three of those to do that. And same thing for my satellites database. So now I've got documentation that, yes, I did do an integrity check on my backups. Yes, my backups work. I can restore them, and they're good, valid data inside. Oh, there's no corruption in the database, I should say. Whether the data is valid or not is a business question, not a DBA question. So I got that output there. What about saving that somewhere else? I'm going to take that result and I'm going to write it out to a table on one of my databases. So I have all that data captured to a variable, and I have my output parameters. This is where I'm going to write to. So on my 2019 database or server, going to write to the DBA things database in the DBO schema. I've got a table called backup validation. If it doesn't already exist, I'm going to automatically create it. And I'm going to have DBA tools try to figure out how long the fields should be for text values. Because I don't want to have a table full of nvarchar maxes or varchar maxes or even varchar 8000s. I did that at a previous job. The memory grants are horrific. Right size your fields, please. So I'm going to take my test results, convert it to a data table object. I'm going to write that data table object out to the database. And it's done. And if I come over here and I look at, there's my backup validation, select top 1000, there's my results. It's all written out to a table. Now again, similar thing to the to what I showed previously with Export Excel. Our auditors are coming. They need proof that I'm doing these things that I say that I'm doing. I've got my Excel parameters here. I'm going to invoke DBA query and just pull everything off that backup validation table, convert it into a data table. I probably don't have to have that here, but I just to be sure. And then pipe that out to Export Excel. There, boom. Here's my history of all my backup validations that I've performed. So I get asked, we do audits once a year. I'm sure lots of folks do. If I'm doing this on a weekly basis or even daily basis, depending on what my requirements are, I can give hundreds and hundreds of rows of data to the auditors saying, yep, here's the documentation, here's all the validations that we've done of our backups for the past year. Have fun. And then you get to answer questions like, well, why does this database not show up until January 17th? Well, because that's when the project went live, right? We're not going to have backup validations for something that didn't exist before that. The last really big one is, I've only got 2 things left. Preparing for the absolute worst. Meteor hits the data center. You need to rebuild all your instances from scratch. What do? Export DBA instance was written for this kind of scenario, the scorched earth scenario. Now I'm gonna run get help on it so you can just see it really quickly as I scroll through. Export DBA instance is going to produce for you SQL scripts out to files that give you everything you need to recreate your databases as restore from backups, logins, database mail, credentials, linked servers, triggers, audits, endpoints, policy-based management, resource governance, the whole thing. Agent jobs, you name it, even central management server. So I'm going to go ahead and run this against my 2017 instance. It's going to take a couple seconds here. I'm just going to dump this out to files in my export folder, and here it is. You can see the output as it's getting streamed back here. I couldn't get into my registry. Oh well, it's on my desktop. Not worried about that. But it's still going. It's creating all these files that if I take these and I run them on a brand new installation of SQL Server, it's going to get me right back to where I started. And is it done running? It is still running. My databases.sql is all the restore database scripts that I need to bring all my databases back up. And really, this is just restore DBA backup output script only for each one of my databases and piped out to a file. And it's still running. Wow. The logins, it does export the logins with the hashed passwords. There's nothing in plain text here, but the hashed passwords are here. So that lets you restore your accounts with the same passwords. If you're concerned about having the hashed passwords saved somewhere, maybe exclude logins from your export process. You can pick and choose with export DBA login which items you want to have exported as well. But by default, it's going to export everything. And hey, it's done running. All right. So our agent script, our agent jobs, it's creating the categories, it's creating the schedules. Got a lot of schedules in there. Wow. And then here's our agent jobs, all the create job scripts with SP add job and SP update job, all those right there for you. So you can get back up and running much quicker. Even so far as going into your system databases. I had one, wow, cool. It'll go into your system databases and find any user created objects and pull those out as well. Because if you're installing a new instance of SQL Server, those user objects aren't going to get recreated in those system databases unless you have this script. This is really important, especially if you installed any of your diagnostic scripts like the first responder kit or SP Who is Active or the maintenance solution. You install those into one of your system databases. You want to get those restored when you bring up your new instance, your replacement instance. Last thing I'm going to show you is how fast are our backups, because we're always curious, how quickly can we take backups, because we don't want to be running a backup and then have it run over into the next backup window. So measure DBA backup throughput. It's a historical measurement. It looks at the history, your backup history, and then calculates how quickly are your backups running. So I go ahead and run that. I'm just looking at my full backups, and I only want to look at a handful of fields that come back. It actually brings back more data than this. So we've got on this instance for each database, our average throughput in megabytes per second, average duration of the backups, minimum throughput, the maximum throughput, and how many backups we've done. So obviously, the more backups we do, the more meaningful those averages become. If we only have one backup, then our average doesn't mean a lot. It just says, oh, that's how fast it ran, right? So I've got 13 full backups of each of these databases. And you can see my averages, my min and my max. I don't know why they are so wildly different, though. That's really strange. So that is all that I have to demo. I just have, I won't even do the full screen thing here. Thank you all for coming out today and again, indulging my space geek tendencies there. If you want to reach out to me, my blog is at flxsql.com. That's Foxtrot Lima X-ray SQL.com. It's short for Finger Lakes. I live in the Finger Lakes area of New York here. My email address is there, and I'm on all the social media as alevianrock, LinkedIn, Twitter, the SQL Community Slack channel, GitHub, and the Discord channel. So again, thank you all for coming out today. And if folks have questions, we do still have some time. We can do some Q&A if you like.
Yep, I'm going to go ahead and thank you, Andy, for this. It's you probably said it. I was having something else that just popped up, and so where are your scripts and stuff like that? Are those out on your blog available?
That's a great question. I have posted I've posted the man, I just lost my train of thought. I posted the notebook and the slides are both on my they're in my GitHub, and they should be, if they're not, they will get there soon, in the SQL Server community, or in the SQL Collaborative GitHub project. So I will, if I don't already have a link to that on my blog, I will post that link as well.
Okay.
And it'll just be
and I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording while we do the rest of that stuff. But if you have that, then we'll make sure we get that added on when we post this video as well.